Let's have a chat about this thing, alcohol. I'm sure you're studying it a little bit in chemistry as a sort of a chemical structure and the properties of alcohols. But what we want to do here initially is we kind of want to look at a few stats and see how alcohol plays its role in society. Okay, so let's have a look at this. What have we got here? We've basically got who tends to drink in the Northern Ireland. By the way, all these stats are from Northern Ireland specifically, okay? So we've got some stats here about who tends to drink. And we tend to find that people, and by the way, this is proportion of all people who drink alcohol, or have drunk something in the last month, that in the younger age group, 18 to 29, so 18 to 30s basically, we tend to find that the significant majority of people, particularly males, do drink. That number sort of declines slightly over age, so some people tend to stop drinking, but even by into the 60s, we're finding that still a significant majority of people do drink alcohol, and that the overall picture is that 3/4 of men and well over 2/3 of women do drink alcohol in Northern Irish society. So that's sort of the big picture. Let's take this a little bit further and let's have a look at this. What we've got here is the information about daily limits. Now, I should remind you that the daily limit of alcohol is 3 units of alcohol per day, okay? Now, that is not recommended that someone drinks 3 units per day. It's just that anything above that would be considered unhealthy. So let's have a bit of a think about this. What we're seeing here for males is that there is an increase over the course of the week. There's an increase over the course of the week, peaking on Friday and then on Saturday nights, where people are drinking over the recommended daily limits. We're tending to find on Monday that some people are, but by the time we get to Saturday, guys, just to be clear here, of those people drinking, okay, we're talking about 70, high 60s, sort of 70% of people are drinking above drinking above the limits. Okay, so that and potentially, guys, I mean, potentially here you're talking about the majority of those drinking well over 4 units, and some many more, of course. So we're finding that people are drinking too much. You get the same pattern for women. Okay, but what we're finding with women is that the peak is a little bit lower. All right, so just be aware, not much, but a little bit. Okay, so we've got that pattern as well. Now, finally, guys, I wanted to have a look at the idea of binge drinking, because I think this is particularly important to discuss with teenagers, really. And what we've got here with binge drinking is we've got the range of people who are binge drinking first of all on weekdays. So this here is Monday to Friday, and then of course here, actually I don't think Friday's included. I think it's Thursday from memory, Monday to Thursday. And here what we've got is we've got Friday to Sunday on the weekends. And what we're finding here, guys, is that with males, for example, we're finding that over 30% of the population is binge drinking over the weekend. It's much lower with regard to the week, but a really significant proportion at the weekend. And what we're finding here as well is that you've got a group of people in this band and this band here who are doing this more than once a weekend, so multiple times a weekend. Okay, so that is not insignificant. Okay, so people binge drinking once a week would be pretty serious. People binge drinking multiple times in a weekend, obviously, that's very serious. Now, I'm not daft enough to believe that me telling you that drinking is a bad idea will make any impact on you, but I think probably it's about knowing the information, right? You guys can make an informed decision about what you want to do. So a couple of things. I've mentioned that 3 units a week is 3 units a day is the guideline. I just want to talk to you about alcohol addiction for a moment, okay? And I want you to consider what kind of makes alcohol kind of an addictive structure. Okay, well the first thing is we are saying it is addictive. Now we could make that point that it is chemically addictive. I'm not going to get into the weeds of that because I've read some interesting things on both sides of this particular argument, but I'm going to argue here that the structure, the chemical structure, is potentially addictive. But I think what's probably more important here is that societally, and I think this is across the UK, we have a culture of drinking, and there is a culture of alcohol drinking. I'm sure you've experienced that. I'm sure you've witnessed that. But other reasons people might move towards addiction is they might be suffering or experiencing other kinds of mental health problems that will lead them to perhaps drink alcohol to try and remedy in their own eyes this. And there does seem to be a link between poverty and alcohol addiction. People with fewer resources do seem to suffer addiction more readily. So there's some interesting points. In terms of laws, guys, I'm not talking about recommendations now. The first thing to note is that alcohol is illegal below the age of 18. So that is, for you guys, if you're under 18 that's meant to be illegal, by the way, not legal, illegal. Let me make that an I. it's illegal to purchase alcohol, it's illegal to consume alcohol, but there are certain regulations where younger people can drink some alcoholic drinks with parents. Okay, so if parents allow, I think there's 3 types of drinks, beer and wine are 2 of them. If parents allow a child of say 16 or 17 to drink a glass of wine, that's for them, and that's allowed to be the case. But I'll just come back to, remember, this is not a law. We are talking about guidelines of 3 units per day. Okay, 3 units per day. And there's other restrictions about drinking outside and things like this. I'm not going to get into those. Now, what I want to address here is the notion of alcohol abuse. Okay, so we sort of looked at it a little bit in the statistics there, but if we talk about a really negative relationship, an abusive relationship with alcohol, what sort of implications is that going to have? Well, the first thing, we've touched on it already, is that it can be addictive. So people may well get trapped in a cycle of behaviours around alcohol that they can't break free from. Secondly, it can have, look at this word again, we've touched on this before, it can have a chronic effect, and we're talking about this obviously on health. This can have an effect on the brain, particularly on memory and brain function. This can have an effect on the liver, particularly the condition of cirrhosis. This can have an implication on the heart, particularly on coronary heart disease and the tendency for the inelasticity of blood vessels leading to the heart. It can negatively affect the pancreas, because lots of alcoholic drinks contain lots of sugar, and the pancreas has to release and has to work hard to release insulin to balance that blood glucose level, and it can have a negative effect on our immune system as well. So, alcohol abuse is not healthy for someone. And I never know how to word these things. If you come across someone, or if you experience someone who drinks heavily and regularly, you will notice that their overall health is not great, and that will be potentially quite global. And I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of that, because you could be in all kinds of different circumstances in your life. I don't want to say anything which is controversial, but I think chronic ill health and alcohol abuse, remember, are quite closely linked. We also have an increased risk specifically of cancer. Okay, so this is something to be aware of. And again, I realise it's grave, but I'm just reporting it to you. The types of cancer that people might experience are mouth cancer. They might also experience what we call I always find this really hard to spell. Esophagus. Now, I've used the British English spelling there. Sometimes you'll see it just as esophagus without the O, but esophagus cancer, that cartilage-based tube that leads down to our stomach. People also might experience throat cancer, particularly of the trachea, and people might be more likely to experience breast cancer. Okay, so these tend to go up, or incidence of these tends to go up with people who abuse alcohol. And then finally, guys, my last point is, of course, it has physical effects on someone. Okay, so just a couple of obvious things. We are ultimately, I guess, sports scientists from our perspective, aren't we? So we just want to sort of address that. Well, first of all, I mean, long-term, if you look at the long-term impact on sort of physicality, what you tend to find is that let me get rid of that arrow. What we tend to finding is that we'll have a down arrow decrease in our components of fitness, our flexibility, our muscular strength, our muscular endurance. They're going to decrease as a result of alcohol abusive behaviour. But also don't forget the short-term impacts of alcohol. And what we might be describing here on a physical side is a down or a loss of coordination. And that loss of coordination can lead to all kinds of problems, falling off things, crashing. I don't mean crashing a vehicle. What I hope people wouldn't be driving. But it could mean that people are more likely to bump into things, they're more likely to cut themselves, they're more likely to fall over, they're more likely to bang heads, they're more likely to do all that stuff. So that short-term loss of coordination can be really, really dangerous in and of itself. There we go.